Welcome to the Close Encounter Club. I'm your host, Justin Gearhart. Do you ever get that feeling in your gut to tell you to go do something? Or that something's about to happen and it ends up actually happening? Some people call this psychic ability, other people call it premonitions. There's a bunch of terms for it. One of them being a synchronicity, which was a term coined by psychologist Carl Jung. A synchronicity occurs when two or more events happen at the same time in a way that feels meaningful or connected, even though they don't have a clear or logical link. In this week's episode, we speak with Christopher. Since he was young, he was told this tragic story by his family members about how his mom predicted something was going to happen before it actually did. Christopher wasn't alive at the time of this experience that his mom had, but his dad and brother were there to corroborate the story. Believe it or not, that's not even the main story that I'm trying to tell with this episode. As of 3 weeks ago of this recording, Christopher had a synchronicity that happened with a stranger in a bar that will literally blow your mind. This is episode 2. The title is Milford Has Been Shot, and you're listening to the Close Encounter Club.
My name is Christopher, and I'm originally from the middle of America, Omaha, Nebraska, technically, but since then I've lived all over the place. Right now I'm in the Pacific Northwest. I recently retired early because of a disability. I don't know, in my free time I play a lot of fantasy sports, which is kind of actually ties into this a little bit, crazily enough. Started with fantasy football 25 years ago. I started playing fantasy baseball, close to the same, but I haven't played it every year. Right now, I basically play fantasy football, baseball, basketball, and hockey. You know, I don't play in like really high stakes leagues. I don't know, small stakes. I tend to win. Like my win rate is kind of like beyond what should statistically be possible, I guess. See, I have advanced training in statistics, like PhD level and things like that, and I look at my win rate, and I understand how, I guess, impossible that it should be. So, but again, I'm not a big gambler either, so that's why I don't play high stakes. But you know, at the same time, it's something that I'm good at. So. I'm a lifelong skeptic, but I would call myself an open-minded skeptic. I went to religious schools from basically kindergarten all the way through high school, but I never really bought in. At some point, I realized I'm not an atheist because, you know, there's room for something else in my worldview. But at the same time, I'd never really seen any strong evidence or anything like that for it. So yeah, open-minded skeptic who I recognized that there were some odd things, some of those statistical anomalies, like I was talking about with fantasy football. And I recognized that there's something more going on here, but I didn't really think about it a whole lot. It was actually, I was watching the congressional hearings where David Grush was talking about it. And, you know, I've been interested. I saw the New York Times article with the videos that came out in 2017, and that kind of piqued my interest. But, you know, I didn't really think about it a whole lot. But then when David Grush was testifying, I think he said something about there possibly being an interdimensional component to it. And it was like a veil was lifted from my eyes, and it was a veil of possibility. Not that I thought, oh, wow, it's interdimensional. It was just like, I never thought about that. So that open-mindedness that I always felt like I had suddenly expanded in a pretty big way, like in that moment. I had a pretty normal childhood. Like I said, I went to religious schools, but at the same time, my family wasn't overtly religious either. I was raised by my grandparents, which I guess was odd to everyone else, but to me it was completely normal. They actually adopted us, so they were mom and dad to me. But at the same time, that's kind of plays into the story a little bit. So what biologically would have been my uncle was actually my brother, and he was 18 years older than me and was out of the house. But me and I had a brother 3 years older than me that basically my parents raised us together after the oldest brother was out of the house. And it was pretty normal. We went to church here and there sometimes, played sports, basically every sport you can imagine. And it was pretty normal for the most part.
What was a typical evening like in your childhood?
My dad would get home from work around 4:35 p.m. We would have dinner pretty much right away. Then I would sit around, watch TV most of the night. I remember when I was young, Barney Miller and shows like that, Welcome Back, Kotter, all of those old sitcoms. And as I got older, Cheers and things like that. And yeah, we would sit around and watch TV. So this incident happened before I was born. It was in the mid 60s. And it was when the older brother, who's 18 years older than me, it was when he was growing up. And I always heard the story. My mom told me the story many times. Towards the end of the night, Johnny Carson, Tonight Show came on at 10:30. So it was fairly late, and usually they would be watching Johnny Carson, and my mom and dad would be dozing off on the couch or the chair or whatever, and that was what they did before they went to bed. My brother, he's a kid, 10:30. Kids are not sleepy or anything like that, so he'd stay up every night and watch Johnny Carson with him. We actually had a small family connection to Johnny Carson because he did radio in Omaha for a few years, and my mom's oldest sister kind of ran around in the same crowds with him. So yeah, they would watch Johnny Carson every night, just like we did when I came along. This one particular night, they were just sitting around watching Johnny, and my mom said she was kind of dozing off. And out of the blue, she just wakes up, like wide awake, and says, "Milford has been shot." Milford was her brother. They were about 11 months apart, very close. Probably as close as siblings can be, unless they're twins. And a lot of people, like the family, kind of considered, kind of jokingly called them the twins and all that because they were so close and they were so much alike, and they did everything together when they were young. So my dad and my brother, of course, were like, "What the heck are you talking about?" And she just said, "I don't know. This suddenly came to me." And, she was kind of freaked out. They were all a little freaked out. Apparently, within a couple of hours after that happened, they got a phone call that her brother had been shot and killed by his ex-wife. As a kid, you're skeptical of things, and part of me was like, my mom's not going to lie about this, but then another part of me was, a little bit skeptical. But my dad and brother corroborated the story, but they also didn't really like to talk about it either. So, we never had I never had a long conversation with either one of them about it, other than them confirming that it happened. But my mom told me this story, probably, a dozen or more times as I was growing up. I haven't thought about this story in 25 years at this point. So, until, of course, a week and a half ago.
So the mom in this story, was it your biological mom or was it your biological grandmother?
Yeah, biological grandmother who adopted me. So when I say my mom, that's what I'm referring to.
Got it. Okay. And is she alive or has she passed?
She's passed.
Okay. Yeah, man, it's a crazy story, especially back in the 60s. There's just no way that she could have known about her brother being shot. So that's the spooky part is, nowadays one can make an argument that she got a text message or I don't know,
Right.
somehow through social media she found out or something, but not back then.
Yeah, there was absolutely no way that she could have known, and my understanding is that the timing of it, when she said that, was pretty close to when he'd actually been shot.
Did your mom ever explain to you what she experienced? Like, for example, did she have a vision? Did she hear a voice? Did she just have a gut feeling? Do you have any insight into that?
She said it just popped into her head that she just instantly knew, as if like a bolt of lightning hit her, and the bolt of lightning told her that her brother had been shot.
That's some really heavy stuff there. Um, do you know how your brother and father reacted to the situation? Have you ever heard that side of the story?
They were a little freaked out, and I gleaned this from her and from the little bit that I talked with both of them about it. Again, like I said, they didn't like to talk about it much, but they were definitely freaked out when she said it, and they believed her. That is the one thing that they did make very clear. They didn't think she was crazy or anything like that. They believed her and they were worried, but they didn't really know what to do. Like, I think they got on the phone and called around to a few people. They weren't saying, "Hey, this just happened." They were just checking in, trying to make sure, hoping that it was just an odd thing. But yeah, they usually they would have been in bed by the time the phone call came, but they were all still up because, like I said, it kind of freaked them out a little bit.
Do you know what their reaction was once they received the phone call that confirmed that he had been shot and killed?
I think they were pretty spooked, and I think that's partly why they didn't like to talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, that's completely understandable.
Yeah. And they're both very rational people, but at the same time, both of them are kind of like me, very skeptical of things, but very open to there being more to reality than we actually know. So yeah, they were pretty spooked.
Do you think this event affected their belief system in any way? Or do you think that they remained the same even after?
I don't think anything really changed. There had been, and I don't remember all of them, but there had been like odd things here and there, throughout our family history that just, didn't really fall within any kind of science or religion or, anything else, just weird things that happened. And I think they just, while they were spooked, they just kind of took it in stride as, we'll never really know. One specific incident that really comes to mind is the family matriarch. So, mom's mother, who biologically would be my great grandmother, she had like premonitions and things like that. And she definitely believed in, listening to those premonitions. But the incident that really sticks out is they were very poor. I mean, My great-grandmother raised 8 children of her own, raised 4 of her grandchildren, and kind of raised most of the grandchildren. I mean, her shadow was so large that she died before I was born, yet she kind of cast a shadow over my life in a way, in a good way. But they were very poor, but even though they were poor, she was very generous. And every week there were people who would come over to like collect for the poor and whatever, like any old clothes that they didn't need or anything like that. Whatever they had that they could give, they would give. It was a winter day. It was snowing outside. And my great-grandmother, everyone called her Ma. And my mom was there with her. They were in the upstairs, and Ma said, like, I don't remember. I don't know what she said, but she said that the people coming to collect for the poor were there, and they were a day early, and she wasn't ready, so they rushed to go get everything ready and went to the door and opened the door, and there was no one there. But there were footsteps coming to the door in the snow. But no one was there. I believe within a couple of days later, Ma had a stroke and died. And both of my mom's sisters were also present. They're no longer with us either, but they both told the exact same story.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back with the rest of the story.
Like I said, I retired early due to a disability, and I'm still kind of trying to figure out how to keep myself busy and all that. I'm a creature of habit. I do the same things pretty much all the time. On Saturdays, I usually watch college football. Most of that time is spent at home, sitting on my couch, watching football on my TV. On this day, like I said, I was born and raised in Nebraska, so I'm also a Nebraska Cornhusker fan. And I was watching the Nebraska-Rutgers game. But I also play, and I feel kind of silly saying this sometimes, but I play Pokemon Go. And there was an event happening that day. I could do it from my couch, but you can get a lot more stuff or whatever if you're moving around, because it's a game that's made to get you moving around. So during halftime, I decided, okay, well, I'm going to go and play this game during halftime, and then I'll get back before halftime's over. I achieved all of the tasks that I was trying to do during halftime, but then halftime is about over, and I thought I was about to go home, but then I thought, oh, well, we've got this, neighborhood chain bar and grill 2 blocks away that I go to, several times a week, but never on Saturdays. I decided, well, I'll go and watch the second half of the game there. I don't know that I've ever gone to this place to watch football on a Saturday. It was kind of the first of a series of decisions that I made that day that were counter to my regular routine. So I go into this place. Everyone there knows me. I've been going there for years. Every time I go there, I sit in the same spot. It's at the very end of the bar, kind of away from where most people usually sit. I've been told that they should just put a plaque there in that spot with my name on it because that's my seat. But on this day, for some reason, I didn't sit there. I sat about 4 or 5 spots away, a lot closer to, where everyone else might sit and all that. I ordered a beer and some food, and I'm watching the game. There's this guy. He was talking to the bartender, seemed fairly lonely. This place is right next to a bunch of hotels, so I figured like he's in town for business or something like that and just, want someone to talk to. I didn't really want to talk to anybody, though. I'm watching a football game and just did not have any interest in talking, and used body language to kind of also say that because I didn't really want the guy to talk to me. Nothing against him or anything like that. I just didn't want to talk to anybody on this day. And the bartender went off to go do something else, and all of a sudden I hear, "So, do you have a dog in this fight?" And I'm like, talking to me. But I'm a nice guy, so I told him, yeah, I was born and raised in Nebraska, so I'm rooting for the Huskers, and we kind of chit-chat a little bit about football. He kind of keeps wanting to talk, so I have a method of getting people to leave me alone when I don't feel like talking to them. I don't want to be rude, so the method, I call it CPR, and that stands for Conspiracies, Politics, and Religion. And usually that will get someone to leave me alone. So I found a way to segue into politics, and I thought that I nailed it because this gentleman and I could not be farther away from each other politically. But he seemed to actually love that, and he really wanted to talk about it, and not in an adversarial way or anything like that. And to his credit, he wanted to talk to somebody who had different beliefs than him. I enjoy that too, so we got to talking a little bit more. I'm still trying to watch the game. I'm like, okay, well, let's go into conspiracies next. And I start talking about the supposedly reverse engineered craft that is in the United States possession, the TR-3B. And I was talking about some videos that I had seen of what appeared to be this alleged craft taking out missiles over Israel, Iranian missiles a few weeks ago, and mentioned something about how I'd seen something about a video that appeared to be taking out a armored Russian column in Ukraine. Strangely, he just was completely unfazed by what I was talking about. And we kind of got us into a conversation, not just about his experience and all that, but end up finding out he's been deployed 11 times. But the first 10 years of that, he was in the military. And then after that, he went to work for a private contractor. That kind of piqued my interest because typically if you leave the military and go to work for a private defense contractor that is deploying you into war zones, that typically means you have special skills, whether you're an operator or something like that. But it sounded like he had been, deep behind enemy lines at some points. He mentioned that he'd been deployed more often as a contractor than he had been as when he was actually a soldier. And all this, I thought it was weird, and I thought that him not really being fazed by what I was saying about this alleged reverse engineered craft, just all of it just was strange to me. At this point, the conversation was suddenly interesting. I wasn't trying to get this guy to stop talking to me anymore. I was, I guess if I lean hard enough into my method to get people to stop talking to me and they're undeterred, often the conversation gets interesting, and this one did. Somehow we got to talking. I asked him if he knew what the term synchronicities referred to, and he said no. So I explained to him that, it was a term coined by Carl Jung, father of modern psychoanalysis. And it refers to coincidences that Carl Jung believed to be more than coincidences. My explanation was almost as simple as that. And I kind of gave him, I can't remember the example I gave him, but it was just a simple example. And then he says, it's really, really interesting that you say that. It's like my aunt always told me this story where her and my uncle and my cousin were sitting around, and literally, as he's saying this, on the inside, I'm thinking, holy cow, he is not about to say what I think he's going to say. And he does. He says, my aunt and my uncle and my cousin were sitting around watching Johnny Carson back in the mid-60s. My aunt and uncle are kind of halfway dozing off when all of a sudden my aunt jolts awake and says, Jimmy. And his uncle and cousin were like, what? Why did you just say Jimmy? And she's like, I don't know. I think I was having a dream and something happened to Jimmy. And she was kind of freaked out. They were all kind of freaked out. Long story short, within a couple hours, they got a phone call that her Uncle Jimmy, who was her favorite uncle, who was only a few years older than her, so they were very close. He had been in a car accident and killed. And he's telling me this story, and I didn't even know what to say. Again, he started saying the sentence, and before he even got to Johnny Carson, I was like, wow, I know what he's going to say. He told me that, and I was absolutely floored. I tell him about the story that my mom had always told me. We both thought it was like really strange, such a nearly identical story. And again, I haven't talked about or thought about this in 20, 25 years. This guy out of the blue says what he said. When he was leaving, I kind of asked him if you can't tell me, cool, but what is it exactly that you do? And he said, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but I've had 3 beers. I'm a system operations manager for, I won't name the company, but they operate drones all over the world and in war zones. Of course, after he says that, I'm thinking maybe that was why he wasn't fazed when I was talking about this craft. If anybody might know something about it, it might be someone doing what he does. The whole thing was weird, but the Johnny Carson story it kind of left me shaken. That entire day was kind of an example of synchronicities. I kept making a series of decisions that I wouldn't usually make. And each of those decisions led to, after I left this bar and grill, I was going to go home, but at the last second, I thought, no, I'll go down to this tap house down the street and grab a couple cans of beer to take home to my wife. I roll in, I ride a power chair. I roll in, and a friend I haven't seen in a year is sitting there. And holy cow, we gave each other a hug. And he's like, I was about to text you to tell you I was here, but for some reason I knew you would show up. And the bartender, who's a friend of mine, he owns the place. He's like, yeah, dude. He was literally going to text you. And he's like, nah, he'll be here in a few minutes. And sure enough, I was there 5 minutes later.
Was that same day?
Yeah, it was immediately after. So I have a beer with this guy, and then I go home. Usually, when this tap house that I go to, some friends of mine own it. On the way home, I go by another place. It's a video game bar that's owned by a couple other friends of mine. Usually, when I go by it, I'll stop in and have a drink, play some video games. And as I was rolling up to the door, I thought, nah, I'll go home. And literally, I never do that. If I'm riding by the place, I'll stop in and say hi to my friends, have a drink, play some video games, go home. But this day I didn't do that. Turned out an incident had happened at home, and right before I showed up, and my wife was in the bedroom just very upset and sobbing, and I came home, consoled her. After she calmed down and all that, we went and split the beer. If I'd done what I was originally planning to do, I wouldn't have been there for her at that moment when she needed me. And it was just a strange series of events that even kind of extended beyond that day. I mean, synchronicities, when I first discovered what they were, it was kind of an eye-opening thing for me because it's something I've experienced my whole life. And I always knew that it was more than just coincidences. But of course, my analytic mind was like no, there's got to be a reason for it. But that day and some of the events that kind of came out of that day, including this interview, just, I don't know, have kind of made me feel like something's being laid out in front of me and that I should probably be paying attention. So.
Yeah, I get that. Your story is really interesting because I think everyone knows the story of fate and that feeling of fate that one might get after, let's say, they've experienced something very difficult, like a mental health crisis or depression, anxiety, whatever it may be. And throughout that hardship, they unlock tools like meditation or exercise, diet, talk therapy, whatever it may be that help them overcome it. And then on the other side of that hardship, they're stronger because of it. And maybe they're in a position where they can help people that are around them, their loved ones that maybe have been in a similar situation or hardship. And they can say things like, hey, have you tried meditation? Have you tried talk therapy? Have you tried exercise? And they can sort of be of service to them. And when that happens, there's a sense of gratitude that they've been through the hard times and that they've been through that difficult hardship, that they can help someone else. And that introduces a sense of fate. Like, I went through that hard time for a purpose, and now I'm on the other side of it. And maybe there was a reason why I went through all that. But your situation is similar, but it asks a different question of, is there an external force that is helping us on a day-to-day basis? You always hear those stories on September 11th in New York where workers that worked in the World Trade Center, on that morning, they just got this gut feeling that said, I don't think I should go into work today. And then we all know how that story ends. Is there an external force that is helping us or guiding us in a certain direction? I don't know, but that's essentially what your story is asking, right?
Yeah. And, there's a lot that I left out about growing up and all that. There was nothing like massively traumatic or anything like that, but there were things left over that I was still processing into adulthood. And about 10 years ago, I started a regular daily mindfulness practice. And I came at it from a completely secular point of view, which is odd. And, this is a whole completely different story altogether. But looking back, I actually had an experience while I was doing the meditation practice. I didn't really know what happened at the time, but knowing what I know now and looking back, I guess the only way that I could describe it is that I accidentally astral projected. And like I said, I really didn't know what happened at the time. I knew what it felt like. I remember it like it happened yesterday, but over the last years, I've gotten to learn a lot more. I realized, holy shit, that's actually what happened to me.
There's this book I read many years ago. The title is Flow, and the author is, gosh, I'm probably going to butcher this name, but it's Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi.
I know what you're talking about. I haven't read it, but yeah.
Really fascinating book. The premise is that happiness is not determined by the things that happen to us, but how we perceive them. And it talks about this state of flow that happens when we're doing things that we enjoy, like drawing or writing a book or riding a bicycle or something athletic, or I don't know, fill in the blank, and how time tends to fly when you're having fun, right? And what happens in that state when you're doing something and all of a sudden an hour flies and we're happiest in that moment. And the book tries to teach us how we can flow from one state to another and continue that state of flow. As you were telling me your story, this book just kind of popped in my mind because that day you described, it reminded me of that, because you were at home, Pokemon Go, the bar, not sitting at the same seat in the bar, the conversation you had, the pub afterwards, not going to the video arcade, your wife having an issue, all these things. It sounded like you were almost in a state of flow in a way.
I think that the universe finds ways to nudge you in the right direction a lot of times. I believe this based on what's happened in the last few weeks, but I also have to go back to that mindfulness practice that I had, that I engaged in 10 years ago. And it lasted about a year, and it actually permanently changed me. One of the interesting things that happened is I was trying to get an online business up and running, and it had been a few years and it had ups and downs. And then I started this mindfulness practice, and it really changed my outlook and the way that I was thinking about things. It kind of quieted that inner monologue in my head to a degree. This business that kind of wasn't really going anywhere all of a sudden blew up, and over the next 3 years, just me and my kids working for me brought in $500,000, when before that it had only brought in, maybe over the 3 years before that, maybe brought in $50,000. And it's just happened. Kind of got away from a lot of that, a lot of circumstances in life. I'm still not the same person I was before the mindfulness practice, but a lot of circumstances in life, a lot of negativity from the outside, a lot of unfortunate, really bad luck, just kind of seemed like it derailed everything. And it really goes back to when that veil of possibility was lifted from my eyes when I was watching David Grush speak. But really has seemed like it's accelerated in the last few weeks. It's like I really believe that the universe is nudging me, saying, okay, you got through that crap. It's time to come out the other side. And I think that the universe is nudging me to do that. And, what is the universe? I don't know. Is it the collective unconscious? Is, God? I have no idea. And I'm not even gonna try to speculate. I do know that when I listen to those nudges, good things typically come out of it.
Maybe it was your mom or your grandmother that's nudging you from the other side.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm speculating a lot there, but I mean, who knows, and you always hear stories about people that meditate and they have euphoric experiences. And I've even experienced something like that once where I was meditating for about 3 hours. And I remember walking downstairs and just having this euphoric happiness that came over me, because I think for once I was not thinking about the future or thinking about the past as us humans normally do. We're constantly not in the present. And I think it took 3 hours of meditation to kind of get me into that mode, but it was blissful when it happened. It was amazing. And is it possible that maybe the combination of things that you've done in your life have thinned the veil around you? And, like you said, whatever the universal force is, whatever that external force is, maybe it's communicating with you in ways that modern science can't explain.
I think so. And as far as like your comment about, I don't know, things like this running in families and like maybe somehow like I'm a little bit more able to notice these things and see these things. I think that you're probably correct on that. And I know this goes beyond the scope of our conversation, but how I mentioned that I've always been a skeptic, but I've always been a very open-minded skeptic. And part of the reason I kept my mind open to the degree that I did is, and I'll try to make this quick, but I had an experience when I was about 16 or 17 years old. And it was regarding that inner monologue. I've had the inner monologue my entire life. I mean, I remember my first memories go back to, I was probably 3 years old, just barely 3. I actually had kind of it wasn't a moment, but it was like a period where I just realized that I was apart from everything else, that I was like me. It was like the moment that I realized that I was like an individual conscious being and all that. I remember the inner monologue, like, I'm sure it was there before then, but my entire life after that, I always had it. It wasn't necessarily always a good thing, wasn't necessarily always a bad thing, but it was always there. But the weird thing is, my whole life, and like I said, I went to religious schools, and you get taught that you pray and God listens, so on and so on. Well, I always felt like something or someone could hear my inner monologue. I didn't necessarily think it was God. When I was about 16 or 17 years old, I decided, let's ask. And being the rational, analytical person that I am, I wasn't just going to ask in my head and wait for an answer in my head, because, that could be explained away. So I set up an experiment. And the experiment, I decided that what it would be is, I felt like something was listening the whole time, but I decided that the experiment was that when I asked the question, is anyone or anything listening? that the answer would be that in the 5 minutes after I asked that question, the power would go on and off 3 times. And it was a beautiful day, no wind. Omaha had a great power grid. You know, it wasn't something that typically happened. You know, I never said any of this out loud, but at the same time, I still made sure that there was absolutely no one home, just so my brother wasn't screwing with me or something like that. I also was kind of clear that this needed to be corroborated, so that when I asked the question, if I got an answer, I needed to corroborate the answer with someone else. And so my neighbor, he was an older man. Guy must have been 90 years old, but he was out mowing his lawn. So I'm like, all right, the neighbor's home. And I waited for him to get done mowing lawn and go into his garage. And I was like, okay, this is it. And I asked the question. Couple minutes went by. I'm kind of laughing to myself like, you're an idiot. When all of a sudden the power flickers off. A minute and a half or so later, it happened again. And I've got my watch on. I'm checking, and I'm just thinking, wow, that is such a weird coincidence. But still, I'm an idiot. There's no way. And finally, we're getting to about 10 seconds left, and it happens a third time. The odds probably are approaching infinity. You know, and I went and asked her, the neighbor, and I was like, did your power go off? He's like, yeah, it was weird. It happened like 3 times. Like, okay, weird. And later on, I corroborated it with another neighbor. I never told anybody because I knew that if I told anyone, they'd think I was nuts or just like totally dismiss me. But the funny thing is that even though I was freaked out, I just accepted that something could hear me, and I never asked it another question. I never even wanted to. I just got the answer that I was looking for and just went through the rest of my life with that in the back of my mind, knowing that while I might be a skeptic, I also have absolute knowledge that there's more than meets the eye going on.
All right, club members, you just heard from Christopher and his, what I think is an amazing story about his mom and her premonition that her brother was shot. And then 20 some years later, meeting this guy in a bar that had an almost identical story with his family. I mean, what are the odds of that? Well, actually, I do know the odds of it because I asked ChatGPT to calculate the odds for me. Are you guys ready for this? The odds of Chris's mom experiencing the same thing as the stranger in the bar's family is 1 in 250 quadrillion. I mean, if that's not a synchronicity, I don't know what is. Anyway, if you like this episode, please feel free to like and subscribe. If you can leave a 5-star review, it would literally mean the world to us. It gives us motivation to keep going, and it also helps expose this podcast to a larger audience, which is good for everyone, right? If you haven't already, follow us on Instagram and Discord. Our link tree will be in the bio. This podcast is created and produced by Justin Gearhart, mixed and mastered by Brett Jarvis, and you've been listening to the Close Encounter Club.